Welcome to the Adventures of Alice and Bob, the podcast where we get root access to the people shaping the world of cybersecurity today and find out a little bit about their journey, the events that have shaped their career, and maybe even dive into those things that still keep them up at night. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Wysopal, a true pioneer in the cybersecurity industry. He's been at the forefront of the industry's evolution for over 3 decades now. As a founding member of the legendary L0pht Heavy Industries, Chris established the foundations for modem vulnerability research and responsible disclosure. He made history when L0pht testified before the US Senate in 1998, becoming one of the first hackers to bring security concerns to Capitol Hill. Chris's career transitioned from Lotus 123 development to consultancy and security research, finally turning the tools he built for his day job into defensive solutions for others, co-founding Veracode in 2005, and serving as its CTO for nearly 2 decades. Today, Chris has taken on a different role as Chief Security Evangelist at Veracode, where he continues to be a thought leader in application security, and most recently, particularly around that intersection of AI and software development. So Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Now, with this podcast, we always start with people's early journeys, and there's kind of a formula for this where people say, I got my first computer and I started learning to program. But you actually started to learn to program before getting the computer, because I believe you used to write code in notebooks to begin with. So maybe you can tell us how your coding in notebooks journey began.
Yeah, so I'm old enough that if you were going to have a computer journey, as a child, computers were really rare. Not many people had them, and one place that you could find a computer was at RadioShack. I don't know if people still remember RadioShack, but back in the, I guess I would say the late 70s, this is before the IBM PC even existed, there was this computer called the TRS-80 that RadioShack sold, and I was fascinated. I saw it in the store. I played around on it a little bit. I drove my bike to the local mall. Kids when they were early teens were able to actually leave for hours at a time on their bike and drive 5 miles away. And people don't do that as much these days, but I did that, and I saw that it was, you could program it in BASIC. So I went to the library. I got a book on BASIC, and I taught myself BASIC through this textbook I got in the library. And I wrote programs down in my notebook because, I didn't have a keyboard and a screen. And so I would write my programs down in a notebook, and I would bring the notebook to the RadioShack. And I asked the manager if it was okay if I, used the computer for quite a while, right? So not like a few minutes, but just sit there and maybe for an hour be typing in stuff. And he said, no, this is great because I want parents to see someone your age using a computer. It's a selling point. If you're right, like someone's interested in this, kids are interested in. So I had a good relationship with the manager, and he would let me sit there for an hour typing. And one of the crazy things about it was, sometimes I couldn't get my whole program in and debugged and all that. So I couldn't actually see if what I wrote in the notebook worked. But this is even before floppy drives. They had a cassette tape. So I brought my own cassette tape and was able to store my work on the cassette tape, take it home with me, and come back maybe the next day or so and finish the program. And so I learned to program in this very, very strange way. But I mean, it sort of set me on a path of exploring technology and being resourceful and figuring out. I think that's part of a lot of hackers my age's early days, was you had to find computers that you could use because they just weren't accessible like we have today.
I like the idea that the manager saw it as an opportunity. I'm just sort of thinking of you as like this child in a window display almost to attract parents in, that the manager said, just go sit there where everyone can see you as they're walking through the mall.
Right. Look, like kids can use it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm smiling listening to your story here because my first experience of a computer was a BBC microsystem. I don't think that quite made it over the States, but again, it was learning in BASIC. And at the time my parents were teachers and they got given these things in schools, but no one really knew what they were. So they didn't give you a floppy disk drive with it or anything. So I'd sit there writing basic code for hours and writing it down in a notebook because I had no way to actually back it up. I coded it all, tried to run it. If it crashed, then I had to start again.
Oh, that's frustrating.
Well, yeah, it's a very fun memories of spending many happy hours translating things from a notebook into it. So I was delighted that you also started coding in notebooks there. As your technology journey went on, you got exposed to more different things. I believe you were initially drawn to bulletin boards in the way that many young men are, because there are things you can find on there that aren't in the library, that aren't in your school resources. So what was it you were initially interested in connecting to computers and starting to dial into these systems for?
Yeah, so I love going to the library and seeing what was there, or going to bookstores and seeing what was available. But as soon as you dialed into a bulletin board, you had this whole world of information that was maybe too fragmented, or maybe too fringe, or maybe dangerous. That wouldn't be in a bookstore. Like, you're not going to find the anarchist cookbook in the library or the bookstore. On BBSs, I found out later, you could mail away to a PO box and someone would mail it to you. But how would you know that? Where would you get the address, right? So that was an example of information that you couldn't get anywhere else. And so I was really drawn. And I don't know why. Maybe it was just a few of the bulletin boards that I had dialed up and was perusing the files that were available. But I started to get drawn to the hacking files. I just was fascinated because I was interested in computers, right? I was programming in BASIC. And there were these files. They were actually, some of the earliest files were called the Agent BIOC files. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but you can actually, they're up on the Internet Archive, right? And these Agent BIOC files were basically like sort of the precursor to FRAC, right? They were little articles about basic stuff like, systems have default passwords. And when people choose passwords, they pick these really common passwords like sex, God, and money. Like, that was actually in the list. And it just showed that there was no idea of password quality at all, right? Just some really basic things like basic social engineering you could do. You could call up a help desk line at a company and trick them into, resetting the password for an account. And how to do things like war dialing, right? So I started to learn the basics of hacking from these files, and that was pretty interesting. But one of the really cool parts about sort of my early BBS days, I started off as just like a lone person, right? Just dialing in, didn't know anybody, right? There was message boards on these things, but I don't know. I just didn't engage with it. Maybe I was just too young, or, I was too scared. So it was just like downloading files and reading and learning. But then the next year after I got my first modem, and I did this in the Boston area, which is 617 area code. That's how everyone used to say where they were from, right? Where are you from? You tell them your area code, right? That was what mattered, because that's where you could dial without it being long distance, right? I went to school the next year to college in upstate New York, and it was the 518 area code outside of Albany. I went to RPI in Troy, New York. And I brought my computer and my modem, and I looked for bulletin boards, and there was hardly any bulletin boards. And I thought to myself, hey, I have all these files I downloaded from all the places in the Boston area, because I sort of they call it winning the area code lottery, right? If you happen to live in an area where there's a lot of technology, like Boston, a lot of early software companies and MIT and the universities, of course, you're going to end up with better BBSs, right? Or more of them. And then I go to upstate New York, and there's really nothing there. Like, RPI is one of the only technical universities there. And so I had the idea to create my own bulletin board system. And this way I could share all the files from 617 to 518, and maybe I would meet somebody, maybe people would come. And I was fascinated to see if people would find the bulletin board. The kind of crazy thing was there was only one phone line into the dorm room. And if you know anything about a bulletin board, it needs a dedicated line, right? Like it has to answer the phone and have the computer pick it up, and the phone and it's tied up while someone is downloading files or uploading or whatever. And so I had to deal with my roommate that I could run the bulletin board from 12 p.m. To 8 a.m. each night. And so and it wasn't that crazy a thing. Like some people did this because they used their home line, right? Like, especially if it was a kid or, college student, couldn't afford a second line. And so I advertised the bulletin board on every bulletin board list I could find. It was called the Peacock BBS. I don't know why. I can't even remember why I named it that. But it had hours, 12 midnight to 8 a.m. Eastern time. And it became quite popular. It became quite popular because it had the good files, right? That was part of it. And it became a little bit of a community. Like there was a few dozen people who would use it, and the message boards actually would discuss things. And it was a way that I actually met the hacker community in upstate New York. Like in my area code, I got to meet people over the bulletin board, and they would tell me about cool things that they war dialed, right? Like, I did this war dialing of this exchange, and I found this office building seating system, right? Someone found a Cosmos dial-up, which is what I think it was 9X at the time used as their interface, which was probably going to be dangerous to log into. They didn't like that. So anyway, it was a great way to get an entree into the hacking world and actually start to meet some like-minded people.
And what's, one of the points we often have to make on this podcast is, people are so used to an interconnected world these days that they forget, like you say, you had the good shareware and files from the Boston area code. You could take them to upstate New York. You could, open them up to people there. And then like these communities got built around it. But actually, even these systems you were coming across referenced in these files on the BBS systems, where people were talking about, well, this is how you'd access it, and these are the things we've dialed into and found. It wasn't like there was, a PDF document explaining how to set up this particular system, what it did. These were the days of kind of 3-ring binders that were stacked 10 high. That was the operating manual for the system. What was that like, exploring, like learning about new systems and technologies that you'd never been exposed to before through these connections you were making?
Right. Like, we talked about information that is not in libraries. How these systems worked was extremely opaque. Like there was no way, like you had to actually sort of just trial and error and try things, because like the menus wouldn't even like tell you what the commands were or anything like that. There was this assumption that people had gone through training and they had the three-ring manual. So there was really this in order to learn anything, you had to really sort of explore and sort of brute force learning these things, and that just it sends you down a path. It also sends you down, and you start to see sort of the ethos of the hacking community growing up is like, if you figured something out, you shared it, right? Like there's this whole idea of sharing information so that we can all get smarter, right? And trading information, like so that if I share some information, I'm expecting you to share information with me too. It isn't like a teacher with pupils. Like we should be peers here. And the what you find with your exploration, you should share with me. And then sort of you get these informal files starting to be created. Like what are the commands in the 9X Cosmos system? Like if you ever get into one, this is how you can navigate it and do things, because the only other way to get those commands would be to maybe go dumpster diving at a NYNEX facility, and that's definitely behind a fence, and find a manual there. So that was the other way of getting information, was actually dumpster diving. So it was a little bit, there was some risk involved in this whole endeavor. And, me and my friends, whenever we get caught dumpster diving, we would just say, like, we're amateur radio people and we're like looking for wire. We're looking for something to build a radio with. And usually they would let us go. We weren't going to say we were trying to find the manuals to your proprietary software.
And in terms of that community that was built up, and as you mentioned radio there, which again, a lot of people in those hacker communities were into the radio as well as the hardware, as well as the software. It was exploring all these avenues. How did you come to be involved with L0pht Heavy Industries?
Yeah, so that I got involved with L0pht Heavy Industries after I graduated college, and I moved back to the Boston area. I grew up in the Boston area, and I had my first apartment with like 4 roommates living in Boston. And so I started dialing BBSs in that area. And I came across a BBS called The Works, run out of Lexington. And they actually had a very interesting aspect of a BBS. They had actually physical meetups, right? So if you got an account on there and you were sort of accepted, you would then go to a physical meetup, which were like once a month. So it's kind of like the 2600 meetups. And in Boston, there was actually we called them works gatherings. Actually existed before there was a 2600 meeting in Boston. And this was a way to like physically meet people, which allows you to generate a whole nother level of trust, right? Because you can have a real face-to-face conversation. You can see that they're not a Fed. And you can, you build up a stronger relationship. So I think that was something fairly unique about the works. And I met this guy, Brian Oblivion, who had a BBS called Black Crawling Systems. And he, and I also met Count Zero, who had a BBS called ATDT. And they both were on the works, but they ran their own systems where they curated their own files, curated their own message boards, you're a sysop, right? The BBS is an experience that the sysop sort of sets the tone and the content. And after I met these guys, I'm like, I want to be on their BBSs. That's Brian sounds especially really good. And so I think I met Brian. We actually met up in person, separate from a works meeting. He's like, before you get on my BBS, we need to meet in person. So we met in person. I sort of gained his trust. He let me on there, and he had lots of radio stuff. He was really into reverse engineering cell phones. He was a great hardware hacker. And that was one of the things that was, I think, unique about the L0pht is even back in 92, when the L0pht was formed and I was asked to join, we had a workbench with oscilloscopes and soldering irons, and we were opening up, Nokia, actually it was the Oki Data 900, because you could do data, you could actually access the data transmission part of the cell signal, which is very interesting. All those control channels and where SMS messages live, was very cool. So that is how I got part of the L0pht, is through the works, through me then meeting people in real life. And I guess the other part, which was really is why I got invited to join, was my day job was as a software engineer. So I had graduated with a degree in computer engineering, and my day job was working at Lotus. And so I had access to what was going on at Lotus. But more importantly, like, I could write software pretty well. And the group there found that, as a complementary skill set, right? Like, they had a couple good hardware guys, but they didn't have anyone who was really a programmer. And so I got saddled with a lot of the system administration work and anything that needed coding. But that was an exciting time, especially the early days of the L0pht. We were just kind of figuring out like what is a hacker space, right? Like what does it mean to have a bunch of equipment and a lot of people sharing it and paying the rent and doing stuff together? It was sort of the early days of that. And I really think the L0pht was the first hackerspace in the United States. We claim it, and no one's come across and said that hasn't happened. There were some hacker spaces in Europe. Chaos Computing Club, I think, went back even 7 years or 8 years earlier than 92 when the L0pht started. But I don't think there was anything in the US at the time.
And talking about that history, we've had Chris Thomas, Space Rogue, on here talking about it. He's written a book about the history of it. Obviously, it's really important to be capturing this hacker history and these things that happened. What were your thoughts about the book? Because obviously people have different perspectives, time changes things. What did you think to the history of the L0pht and where, your part was played in that?
Yeah. So I think the book, I really enjoyed the book. And, part of it is I'm just happy that someone wrote this down, right? And other people can read it. So there's that. I'm thankful he did the work to do that. But I think one of the interesting things is it's a memoir, so it's just Space Rogue's perspective, right? It's only from his perspective. It's not like some journalist that interviewed, the L0pht members or interviewed other people who knew us and went to the L0pht and researched what we had said back then. It's just him. So there's an interesting perspective that you get because you get it from one person's viewpoint. And when you read the book, I mean, as a person who sort of was at a lot of the events that happened, I'm thinking to myself, I don't really remember it that way. Like that, it was a different person who said that or did that. And it's, as you get older, you start to realize like memories are sort of like what that person's perspective was at the time, and then all the things that happen between then and now can alter that. Like if someone else keeps telling a story that's a little different than your story, you might start picking up on that story. Or if someone shows you a picture of something that happened, now you're remembering it with that picture in it. So it made me think that we need these stories, right? And we need them from multiple people and multiple perspectives to understand what was going on at the time. So I appreciate, it's not like I want to fight with him about, that's wrong, right? I appreciate, and I feel like it's adding to my memory and adding to the history to have these different perspectives, even if the facts are somewhat different.
Well, there's so many great stories from that time. And one of them I thought it'd be definitely worth asking about was when there was a kind of an interesting penetration test you got involved in, where there was kind of mixed incentives for the L0pht to be involved in this. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the early penetration tests when it was someone who was potentially looking to acquire or bulk hire members of the L0pht, but also wanted some security testing done.
Yeah. So this was sort of like when, after we had testified at the Senate, and, we were in so many different news articles, like what we were doing was starting to become well known. And we would talk about like, and this goes back to Dan Farmer and Wheatsy Venom's paper, securing your site by breaking into it. Like this was part of the sort of the hacker ethos to securing something, was like find the holes,
Hack
right?
yourself first, yeah.
Hack yourself first. And so we wanted to show that, we could do that and take all the knowledge we each individually had and wrap it together and say, hey, you could hire the L0pht to do a pen test of your organization, and we have a multifaceted skill set here, and we had done a couple of those, but one of the very first ones we did, we were talking to this company, Cambridge Technology Partners. Now, this is, I think the company's gone through so many different iterations, because we're going back, what are we going back now? 27 years.
Few years.
I think the technology's changed. So if I talk about any vulnerabilities, I think it's been patched by now. So we were thinking, like, where do we go as the L0pht, right? Do we stay as a hacker clubhouse, or do we sort of make this our day job, right? And not, like, some people were working at like CompUSA, which was a computer store. So do you want to work retail at CompUSA, or do you want to hack all day? And now, how could we figure out how to turn what we love doing into a job? Now, that whole statement is fraught with all kinds of problems, right? Because sometimes when you're doing something as your day job, it's a completely different viewpoint on doing something that it was a hobby or that you love. Like, how many home chefs want to actually be a chef in a restaurant? It's very different. So we were going to learn that along the way, but at the time we said, let's talk to some companies that sell, services, and say, do you want to sell pen testing services? So we found this company. We knew someone who worked there. They did computer consulting, IT work, programming work, all kinds of computer consulting. And there weren't really many people doing penetration testing or ethical hacking. It was very, very new. I think IBM started doing it in like 99. They started doing it. And there was one company called ComSec that was founded by Chris Goggins, who was famously Eric Bloodaxe from, I don't know if it was Legion of Doom or not, but he was even more old school than I was. And they had tried, and it only lasted like a year, and it didn't really work. And I think part of it was you have to have some business experience and business knowledge to run a business. You can't just have the service providers. There's a whole business aspect. So we thought, hey, why don't we join up with this company? And we came up with the idea to say, if you want to know what the service would be like, why don't we do a penetration test of your organization, and you'll see what we do, and we'll give you a report, and we'll show you the vulnerabilities we find, and you'll get the benefit of becoming more secure, and you'll have really firsthand knowledge. This isn't like a demo, or we're gonna give you theoretical materials. You're gonna see the real thing. And they agreed to it, which I thought was kind of fascinating. So they agreed to this. So we got the get out of jail free card, right? Like, these guys can hack us. They can hack our network. They can actually try to physically sneak into the facilities. They can hack anything we have wireless. They can hack our phone system. We convinced them that we wanted sort of the no holds barred, full spectrum penetration testing, so you can see all the different aspects that we could do. And we were very excited, because a lot of times penetration testing is like, okay, you have to come from this IP address, and all you can do is connect to this scope of systems, which I totally understand why people do it that way, but it's not that much fun. So we were having Brian do wireless surveillance, just seeing like what kind of wireless reconnaissance. We had Tan trying to see, like, where do they have badge readers? Where do people prop open doors? What do their employee badges look like? Can I sneak in? Can I tailgate people? We had Kingpin was going after their PBX, their phone system, and their voicemail. And then, like Mudge and myself, we're going after, the software. We're going over the network. We're hitting the web server and all of this stuff. And they actually, I would say that they might have been better than average as a company, because they're a computer IT shop, right? Like, this isn't, we're not attacking a retail organization or something like that. Like, this is what these people do. And actually, I felt that they were better than average. That didn't mean we didn't completely own them, because there's just so many vulnerabilities out there, right? It's tough, right? It's tough, especially back then, because you didn't have the kind of scanning tools that you have today, right? There was no Qualys, right? Back then. So one of the ways that we got in was, there was like a CGI bin script on the web server that we realized we could do command injection on, but it was doing like some kind of input filtering. So it was really hard to do, full command injection, but we were trying to figure out, like, what could we do? And we figured out one thing we could do was we could edit files, right? Like, with the permissions we had, like, it was also locked down, right? It was locked down, running under the www user. I think it was Apache at the time. And so it was locked down, the group and the user ID. And we came up with this idea that if we could edit the http.conf file, that we could change the user and group, that because the permissions were wrong, right? Like, your configuration file should have the permissions of not of the web server user, but of root or some other higher privilege user. And so this is where they messed up. Well, they messed up a couple places. We probably found the vulnerability in their CGI bin script. So maybe they didn't know that, right? So they didn't test that, but they really screwed up when they didn't harden the configuration of the web server. So we edited the httpd.conf file, so that next time the web server started up, it would be running as root, and we could do anything. So we did that. And then we figured out, we could get an uptime command through, and we looked at the uptime, and it was 250 days. And we said, we have a problem here. Like, this thing never gets restarted. They don't change the configuration or anything on this thing. But we made the change anyway. And then when we went on to, hack other stuff. And then, like a couple days later, I was listening to the news, and there was a manhole fire in Cambridge, really close to where CTP was. And a sad thing is, someone actually died. There was like an explosion. A utility worker died. But I thought, well, wait a minute. What if the power goes out, and the thing's going to have to reboot? So I'm pinging the thing. I'm pinging it. It's up. And so I just left it pinging. And then 12 hours later, the web server went down, and I was so excited. And then, cause the UPS only had about 12 hours on it. Right. So when it came back up again, it was root. And then we were in, we could do whatever we wanted. So, there may have been an easier way to get in, but, that's essentially, how we did it. But, one of the other really kind of interesting things that happened in the pen test was, Mudge came up with this idea. I think we found a system with a fairly guessable password. We got onto the system, and we found a privilege escalation vulnerability, and that allowed us to change the root password on the system. So we changed the root password on the system. And this is a trick for all you pen testers out there. If you change the root password on the system, someone is going to be trying a lot of passwords to try to get in, because they're going to try it over and over again, and it's not going to work. And they're going to think to themselves, did we rotate this? Do I have my passwords wrong? And we found that they had actually entered in 10 different passwords to which were root passwords on 10 different other systems to try to get into this one. So now we had this list of 10 root passwords, and we started using them on all the systems, which allowed us to get root on everything, right? So everyone should be using two-factor, right? Especially for root. But that was that they probably thought they were secure, right? Because they weren't using the same root password on every system. They had a bunch of them, but we got in. But there was one other thing which I think is sort of the highlight of this story, because it really kind of shows like there's a human element to all of this. Was Kingpin is trying to hack into their voicemails, right? Because we just want to show where all the different vulnerabilities are. And what voicemail account does he try to hack into? But the guy that is thinking about acquiring us, right? Like he's like the corporate development VP or the VP of services. I don't remember exactly. I think his name was Mike. And so he's going after Mike's mailbox. And it turns out that they're using three digit voicemail passwords, which is horribly insecure. And so Kingpin has the list of the most commonly used 3-digit passwords, like 111, 123, and he's going down the list in sort of order of prevalence. And so he doesn't have to do this, on average, you'd have to do it 500 times. I think he gets it in like 10 tries, because I think it was 5, 6, 7, right? It was pretty simple. So he gets into his voicemail. So he's listening to all his voicemails, and we have the get out of jail free card, right? So we can do this. Like, hey, we're going to prove we got into your voicemail because here's the contents and some recordings of your voicemail. And so we're hearing him talk to other executives in the company about like, these L0pht guys, they think they're prima donnas, they think they're great, they're asking for all this money above what our average consultant's salary is, and all of this stuff. And like, who are these guys? Some of them don't even have college degrees. One guy's like 19. And so, because we just didn't fit into the mold. And this is one of the whole things that's really been great about, cybersecurity, is you get people who are, unconventional talent, right? You get people that are self-taught, or they've gone to a boot camp or something like that. You don't get people with master's degrees in computer science, right? You can, but you get a lot of other people. And this was part of the, part, no one was thinking that back then. There was this, they had given us like sort of their initial offer, and we're like, no, this is too low. These salaries are too low. And we need all these other things too, besides money. Like we need a lab, and the lab needs to be set up this way. And one of the things that we thought we, really needed was we needed a mobile lab, right? Because we were huge fans of sneakers, right? And sneakers was sort of like what we had in our mind as how we would operate, right? Because we have people with all these different skill sets, right? Physical security, radio, phone systems, and things like that. Just like in the sneakers movie. So we looked at them as sort of the archetype of what we wanted. And, they physically went to the location that they were hacking, and they brought equipment with them, and they did physical stuff. And we wanted to be able to do that too. So I think we described it like the sneakers sort of, step van kind of bread truck kind of thing that they had. And I think they were confused about it. I think they thought we wanted an RV. So a little more Breaking Bad than sneakers, right? Even though Breaking Bad didn't happen. And so one of the funny things that was on one of the voicemails, and basically the guy used an expletive. He says, I can't work with these guys. They want an effing Winnebago. And so that's when we realized that maybe we were pushing it a little too far. But having all those artifacts of the passwords and the voicemails and pictures of getting in, the readout from the pen test was a lot of fun. And I remember this was like before there were CISOs. We had handed out basically to everybody in the room a printout of our report. And after we gave the readout, the CIO went around the room and collected everybody's report. He wanted to control that information because we had like the head admin was there and whoever the head of services was there. The CIO is like, I'm going to be controlling this because it was kind of devastating what we ended up doing.
So you never ended up breaking that corporate mold and quite fitting in with that company, but you had a lot of fun and success in doing that pen test.
Yeah, and I think we learned a little bit more about what we wanted to do as a group as we moved into the business world, and eventually we went and got acquired by At Stake and became part of that company, but that I think CTP was like 4,000 employees at that time, and so it was a little too big for something like what we wanted to do. So I think we learned a lot. We had fun, and we also learned a little bit of a business lesson for our next potential acquisition.
And when you were merged into At Stake, what was that transition like? What was there like? Were there big shocks in moving into a company like that, or was it actually this is the dream that we've been looking for?
So I think it was the dream in the beginning. I think we had like a good maybe 4 to 6 months because we spec'd out exactly what we wanted. And like we wanted to be the At Stake research lab. We didn't want to be consultants, right? We said we want to build tools. We want to find vulnerabilities that show our expertise, and also we can demonstrate to customers. And so we kind of set ourselves up that way, and that was much more. And we also said we want to be able to work on different research topics that we wanted to work on. Like, so before the business could justify justify something, we wanted to be able to work on it. So I'll give you an example. Like Brian wanted to work on radio stuff. Like he wanted to build a basically a Wi-Fi pen testing kit, right? And this is before anyone was doing Wi-Fi pen tests. So customers didn't know to ask for it, right? Like in a traditional company, you sort of wait for that customer demand. Like, hey, we were breached over our Wi-Fi. Can you help us? Right? This was before that was happening, right? Because if you think about it, the attacks weren't widespread yet. Like we when you're doing vulnerability research, you're coming up with new vulnerabilities and new attacks. And so we wanted to continue doing that. We didn't want to be doing it like 2 or 3 years later when customers started asking for it. And so we truly were doing all this different vulnerability research across appliances, across traditional software, across mobile devices, across things like Wi-Fi. But I think, and so I think our honeymoon was like the first 5 or so months before they hired a CEO. And then they hired a CEO, and the CEO sort of wanted to put his imprint on what is this lab going to do and what do I think is going to be good for the business. And then things started to change. And for some of us, we stayed there the whole time At Stake existed. And for other people, they either wanted to leave or they found that their services were no longer required. Like we don't need people to do this. So that's when things, the reality of you can't always do, especially with a whole group of people, you can't always do exactly what you want to do and fit into a business world unless you completely control the whole thing, right? Like if it's just if it was a partnership and we controlled it. But we ended up going down that path because I feel like we just didn't feel comfortable enough with our business experience to hire the salespeople and the marketing people and the HR people and the finance people and manage all of them. That's that that that's hard. That's being a CEO, right? And you know, we didn't have anyone who wanted to do that job.
Well, it's interesting to just listen to you talk there, because some of the things you're talking about, that research, getting out ahead of the customer need and finding new opportunities, and actually during your time at Stake, where you were building out these tools to do things for customers, to make your life easier, your job easier, so you could see that there was a customer need for some of these things. Then another acquisition happens and things change at Stake, and actually that gives you the opportunity to then take those tools and actually be the CEO effectively, or be the CTO, and take those tools and meet the market. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that transition and how it came about that you got to actually take those tools you've been working on and again come back to the things that you wanted to focus on.
Right. So we still did have the Veracode research lab, but it was really just focused on software, like all the hardware stuff. Eventually, the business just decided that wasn't an area that we wanted to go into, so we don't need to do vulnerability research on hardware if we don't need tools and vulnerabilities there. So we really focused on software. And Christian Ryu, who was Dildog, or is Dildog, he came up with this idea of like automating the reverse engineering of software. So essentially decompiling the software and debugging the software. And I basically said, well, what if we actually decompiled to enough of something code-like that all those things that we do in manual code reviews, we can use those rules and program those rules in, right? So Christian was really the heavy lifting decompiler guy, which was like really breaking new ground. Like he was doing things to get an accurate decompilation, reverse engineering of software. No one had really done that before. And what I was doing was collecting the rules that we would use when we did manual code reviews, which a lot of the consultants at Stake did. I would talk to them. What do you look for? What are the sources and sinks of data that you look for when you're trying to find a SQL injection vulnerability, for instance, and codifying all that. And I think at first we just did it on the C language on Windows, right? And eventually then we did C on Solaris and Linux, and started to build something that was beyond a tool that the consultants could use, even though they could, to replace code review. We said, what we could sell this tool and customers could test themselves, right? Like a development team could make sure their security, they were protected against exploitation of all these different classic OWASP top 10 type things, even though OWASP top 10 didn't exist until 2003. No, wait a minute, 2005. So this was a little before the OWASP top 10, but the idea of a list of things you would want to look for was there. And we had it working. We actually had a couple of customers at the time. I think AT&T and Fidelity, because they were consulting customers of ours, and they were sort of cutting edge security teams that wanted to see what they could do with application security. And then the business model of At Stake just wasn't scaling the way the investors wanted it to. We were only backed by one VC, Battery Ventures, and it just wasn't. It was never going to do the sort of the 5 to 10x return that, no matter what happened, because at the end of the day, it was just a consulting company. You're scaling with people, right? And this idea of us coming up with this product to sell, even though it was at a consulting company, this was a completely new product category. It wasn't like they were going to bank everything on this. So they ended up putting the company up for sale, and we got sold to Symantec. And so Symantec acquired all of at stake, all the technology, all of our tools, and we get there, and I'm like, we need to talk to some of the software executives. You guys, the consulting arm, the services arm of Symantec bought us, but I need to talk to the software executives and show them what we're building. And they basically said, no, thanks. That's not on our roadmap. That's not like building a tool for developers is something that Symantec used to do. And we actually divested ourselves of all that. And we're focusing 100% on, data security, right? Like email security, network security, data security, and not application security, because application security wasn't really a category yet. And again, like this is the problem of being ahead of the curve, right? Like you have to proselytize for a long time to get someone to understand why you're doing this and that it could be a viable business. And that is really hard to do within a big company. Believe me, I tried. And so after about 6 months, they laid off the team. They're like, we don't need these people building this tool. I think there was like 6 or 7 of us. We had built up the team over the last couple of years at stake. They laid us off. But Christian and I were basically said, we still believe that this is a viable technology and it would be a great line of business for Symantec, but if they don't want to do it, we're going to do it. So, people ask me a lot, like, how did you determine you wanted to be a founder? Like, how did you wanted to start your own company? Like, what made you want to start your own company? And so my story is like, I had this cool technology that I thought that could change the landscape of cybersecurity, and it was basically going to be put on the shelf and no one was going to get to use it. And so I was motivated to start a company just to bring this technology to life. I never thought I would be a founder. I just wanted to build things and secure things and help and do cool cybersecurity things. But the only way to get this to life was to spin it out of Symantec. We even had a patent, right? So we actually patented our idea. So even if we rebuilt it, we would have had to license the patent from Symantec. So we said, oh, we gotta spin this out. So we went out and got funding from a few different VCs, and we were able to convince Symantec to sell us the technology and sell us the patent. But yeah, we had to license the patent back to them. So if they wanted to use it, they could give them a share of the company. And that worked out great because I'm here 19 years later with a company that wouldn't have existed unless Christian and I really pushed for doing that.
It's just such a fantastic story. All your stories on this episode have been absolutely fantastic. It's a bit like listening to kind of the hackers equivalent of like Avengers Assemble when you're talking about all these,
Yeah.
all these names getting involved in pen tests and, Dildog and all these other people involved in the early sort of founding of these new areas. What were the early days? Let's see, you've got the technology from Symantec, you've got the funding, you've built what we now know is a very successful, its own segment, its own thing. How long did it take for you to actually prove to the market and get the recognition and growth to say, okay, we're definitely onto something here?
Yeah, it takes a lot longer than you would ever think. That was one of the big lessons of being involved in a startup is just how long it takes. Like the first lesson is, when it's a new category, it takes years. Like it takes a couple of years of talking to analysts, talking to customers, giving away, having early adopters that you're basically giving the stuff away to and you're working with as design partners before you even get to sell anything. Even though it works, right? You're like, hey, it works for this one thing. If you feed a C program into it, we will spit out vulnerabilities. It's like, well, I need the vulnerabilities in this format. It's enterprise software, so I need these controls, right? I need it to work with Active Directory and SAML, and you're like, oh my gosh, right? So there's so much stuff you have to build, and also at the same time, convince people to do something new, right? Like this isn't like, firewalls were invented in 98 and in 2008, there's 10 firewall companies and you could start a new firewall company that was slightly differentiated or a little bit cheaper. And you could go and just say, hey, I got a better firewall. And someone would say, oh, give me a demo. Oh, we'll try it. I'll buy it. And you have like a 6-month sales cycle. This was like, we had 2 or 3 years of not really selling much of anything. Because it's not just a sales cycle, you have to evangelize it. And I think it took us probably about 5 years before we started to get that kind of traction where the market is kind of accepting what we're doing and people are starting to say, I need this at my business. And so I think there's always an evangelist period of 1 to 2 years at any startup. But I think ours was longer because we were just a little too early to market. And if I had to change anything, I wouldn't have gone to market yet. I would have stayed in stealth mode probably for another couple of years. We were in stealth mode for, I think, about 9-10 months, building the first release of the product. But I probably would have done that longer. And then the other thing that I learned things take a long time is now it's taken like 4 or 5 years to start to get that traction where you can actually have a sales team of like 5 to 10 people out there selling this stuff, and you're retaining those salespeople because they're not coming in for a year and not selling anything and leaving. So you got that traction happening. Now it's like, well, at every startup company, you need a liquidity event, right? Like the VCs want their money back, and they don't want to own you forever, right? That's not how it works. They invest, they get a return. And so that's with venture capital, these liquidity events can take a long time to happen, like an IPO, getting acquired. And we had our second CEO come in at year 5, and he threw up a chart on the wall at one of our on the projector at one of these town meetings, and it showed the average time that a startup got acquired, and the average was 10 years. That was the average, right? So this is like half of the companies, it takes longer than 10 years to hit that liquidity event. And we were like at year like 4.5 or 5, and I'm like, oh no, another 5 years. And it turned out to be 11 years for Veracode. We got acquired by CA Technologies at 11 years old.
Fantastic. And we're almost running out of time here. There's so many exciting things. We definitely need to get you back for a part 2 here. But I was just curious with your, I think last year you changed your title to Chief Security Evangelist. I wondered, did you miss those evangelism days in the early days of the startup and wanted to get back to that closer to the customer problem?
So, I mean, I think evangelist was always part of my job as CTO. Different CTOs, I think companies to some degree build their skill sets around the CTO skill set, or if especially it's a CTO founder. And so mine was definitely more on the cybersecurity side than the technology side, for one. But I also just enjoyed engaging with analysts, the customers, the media. And so that was always part of my role. Let's say it was a third of my role. And I had a couple teams that reported to me. And then after 18 years, I thought, let's do something new. Let's make that my whole role. And let's face it, managing people is hard, right? And I had done that for 18 years, and I said, let's try not managing people, and doing the evangelism full time. And I'm coming up just on a year now, of doing it, and I really enjoyed it. Like, for one thing, I want a lot more podcasts. I used to not have time to do podcasts. So it's enabled more of this conversations, and hopefully I can, people can learn more from my experience now.
And as you're nearly up to your 1 year anniversary, what are you most excited about for the next year of that role?
Yeah. So, I mean, I love cybersecurity keeps changing. It keeps constantly changing. So, and it's because technology keeps changing. Right. And so technology changes, drive cybersecurity changes. And I think the biggest change right now we're dealing with is, let's guess what it is. AI.
AI, yeah. It's always going to be AI.
And yeah, so it's driving a lot of interesting conversations. And it opens up so many different new vulnerabilities, so many different potential solutions to cybersecurity problems. People are always asking me, is AI going to be better for defense, or is it going to be better for offense? I think the jury is out, but I think, right now it's looking a little better for defense. Like, we're using it at Veracode for defense because we have Veracode Fix, which will fix your code. If you point a vulnerability at Veracode Fix, it'll tell you how to change the code. Right? It generates the solution. So that's very exciting. So I think being able to get out there and talk about how AI can be used to make software more secure, but also talk about the risks to it, are things that are kind of getting me excited for the next year.
Well, that's great. And if people want to find out more about what you get up to and where to follow you, where are the best places to go for that?
So, you can see me on LinkedIn under my name, on Twitter and Blue Sky and Mastodon as Weld Pond, which I don't think we've mentioned that yet, but
we haven't. No, we'll have to save that for episode 2, unless you want to give it
my hacker name. We can save that one for episode 2. And check out the Veracode blog. There'll be blogs and different webinars and things that I've done.
Well, that's great. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today on this episode of Adventures of Alice and Bob. A big thanks to the man, the myth, legend that is Chris Wysopal. And as always, thanks to our super producer, Jesse, and the team at Beyond Trust who make this podcast happen. I'm James Maud, and this has been Adventures of Alice and Bob.
Thank you for listening to the Adventures of Alice and Bob. Do you have any stories from the cybersecurity trenches that would make our listeners' jaws drop? If so, we would love to have you on the podcast. Maybe you faced down a ransomware attack with nothing but coffee and determination, discovered a breach in the most unexpected way, or had a pen test go horribly wrong. Whatever your tale, funny, harrowing, or just plain wild, we want to feature you on the show. To share your cybersecurity war stories, email us at booking@merchantsmedia.com.